The email hit my inbox at 4:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. Michael, please see me first thing tomorrow morning. Patricia Williams, CEO. That's when I knew they were coming for me. I'm Michael Patterson, 52 years old, and I've been writing code since these kids were still figuring out how to tie their shoes. 15 years at Apex Technologies, watching this company grow from 12 people in a rented office to a billion-dollar corporation. And now they wanted me gone. But here's the thing they didn't count on. My shares had been fully vested since our IPO back in 2018. All 20,400,000 of them. At yesterday's closing price of $3.02 per share, we're talking about $7.2 million sitting in my E-Trade account. They were about to hand me the biggest severance package in corporate history, and they didn't even know it. Look, let me back up and tell you how we got to this point. When I joined Apex in 2009, the company was just Patricia Williams and 11 other people crammed into a space above a Starbucks in downtown San Jose. I was employee number 8, brought in to build their entire back-end infrastructure from scratch. Patricia was different back then, hungry, scrappy, actually listened when her engineers talked. She promised me real equity if I helped build something special. Those early years were something else. We'd work 80-hour weeks, live on pizza and Red Bull, and genuinely believe we were changing the world. I designed the entire authentication system that still handles 2 million logins daily. My code runs 90% of their core operations. Without my architecture, Apex would collapse faster than a house of cards in an earthquake. But you know how success changes people. As Apex grew from startup to IPO darling, Patricia started bringing in her Stanford MBA buddies. First came James Morrison, her old fraternity brother, as VP of Operations. Then Nancy Phillips from her previous company as HR director. Suddenly, those of us who'd built the company from nothing started feeling like outsiders in our own house. The real shift happened when Patricia's nephew graduated college 2 years ago. Tommy Williams, 24 years old, computer science degree from UC Davis, and about as qualified to run engineering as my neighbor's cat. But family's family, right? Tommy got fast-tracked to senior project manager, making architectural decisions about systems he couldn't even pronounce correctly. That's when the modernization initiative started. Every meeting, Tommy would push to rewrite everything in whatever framework he'd read about on Medium that week. Never mind that our current system handled 50 million transactions daily without breaking a sweat. Never mind that a complete rewrite would cost $20 million and take 3 years minimum. Tommy had discovered microservices, so obviously we needed to scrap 15 years of battle-tested code. I pushed back hard. In every architecture review, I'd explain why our monolithic approach worked, why the proposed changes would create more problems than they solved, why fixing what wasn't broken was corporate suicide. The other senior engineers agreed with me privately, but they'd sit there silent as church mice during meetings. They had mortgages and families to think about. And honestly, I get it. At 52, with my daughter Emma halfway through medical school at UCSF and my son Jake finishing junior year at Stanford, I should have kept my mouth shut too. My divorce 3 years ago had already cost me half my savings. Mom's assisted living facility runs $5,000 a month, and those bills don't pay themselves. I needed this job as much as anyone, but sometimes you reach a point where you just can't watch incompetence destroy everything you've built. The breaking point came during last month's quarterly engineering review. Tommy stood up there with his PowerPoint presentation, because of course he uses PowerPoint for technical specs, and announced his latest brilliant idea. He wanted to migrate our entire customer database to a NoSQL solution because relational databases are so 2010. I watched Patricia nod along like it made perfect sense. Like we weren't talking about 200 terabytes of financial transaction data that needed ACID compliance to function properly. Tommy, I said, trying to keep my voice level, we're processing credit card transactions and bank transfers. You can't just dump customer financial data into MongoDB and hope for the best. We need guaranteed consistency. The room went dead quiet. You could hear the air conditioning humming. Tommy's face turned the color of a fire truck. Michael, I think you're being resistant to innovation. Maybe it's time for some fresh perspective on this team. Fresh perspective. Yeah, I knew what that meant. Maybe it's time for some younger engineers who won't question the CEO's nephew when he suggests we rebuild NASA with Legos. That's when I started paying closer attention to the signs. And boy, were there signs. My access to certain production systems had been quietly revoked. For security reasons, Nancy explained when I asked. Projects I'd led for years were suddenly reassigned to distribute the workload better. The weekly architecture meetings I'd been running since 2011 were moved to times when I had standing appointments. Then I'd get passive-aggressive emails about my attendance issues. Nancy from HR started scheduling random check-ins to discuss my integration with the evolving team dynamic. She'd ask questions like, "How do you feel about mentoring younger team members?" And "What are your thoughts on adapting to new methodologies?" while furiously taking notes on her laptop. They thought they were being subtle. Build a paper trail, create a narrative about an older employee who couldn't adapt to change, then push me out before my equity became too expensive to buy back. It's corporate downsizing 101. Here's what they didn't realize, though. They'd already missed their window. See, when I joined Apex in 2009, my equity package included 800,000 shares with a standard 4-year vesting schedule and a 1-year cliff. But there was also an acceleration clause buried in the fine print. If the company went public or got acquired, all unvested shares would immediately vest at 100%. When Apex went public in March 2018, that acceleration clause kicked in like a rocket booster. Every single one of my shares vested instantly. But here's the beautiful part. My original 800,000 shares had split 3-for-1 in 2015 when we hit our first $100 million revenue milestone. So by the time we went public, I owned 2,400,000 fully vested shares. I kept this little detail to myself while watching them choreograph my professional execution. The pattern was almost artistic once you knew what to look for. Tommy would assign me impossible deadlines on projects outside my expertise, then act shocked when I couldn't deliver. Nancy would schedule mandatory team-building exercises during my son's college visits, then document my lack of commitment when I asked to reschedule. Patricia started copying legal on routine emails that had never needed legal review before. They were building their case methodically, professionally. I had to admire the coordination, even if the execution was amateur hour. The final act of this corporate theater started 3 weeks ago during what they called a strategic architecture review. Tommy had prepared another one of his slide decks, this time proposing we replace our entire authentication system, the one I'd designed, built, and maintained for 12 years, with some blockchain-based identity verification platform his college buddy had cooked up in a garage. This new system offers distributed ledger authentication, Tommy explained to the room like he was announcing the cure for cancer. It's the future of secure identity management. I almost choked on my coffee. Blockchain for user login? It was like suggesting we use a Formula One race car to deliver pizza. Technically impressive, completely impractical, and guaranteed to cost 10 times more than the perfectly functional solution we already had. "Tommy," I said, keeping my voice as neutral as possible, "our current system handles 2 million authentication requests daily with 99.97% uptime. What specific problem are we trying to solve here?" The room shifted uncomfortably. Sarah Martinez from the database team was staring at her laptop. Mark Rodriguez from DevOps suddenly found his coffee cup fascinating. Even Rebecca Martinez, who usually backed me up in these meetings, was avoiding eye contact. Tommy's jaw tightened. "The problem, Michael, is that you've built a black box that only you understand. What happens to this company when you're not here anymore?" There it was. The threat laid out in plain English, right in front of the entire engineering team. Not if I left, but when I wasn't there anymore. "Then maybe," I replied, "someone should have asked me to document it better instead of trying to replace it with something that doesn't exist yet." Patricia cleared her throat. "I think what Tommy's trying to say is that we need systems that are more accessible to the broader team, more collaborative in their design and maintenance." Collaborative. In corporate speak, that means designed by committee so nobody can be held responsible when it fails. The meeting wrapped up shortly after that exchange. I could see Patricia and Tommy trading meaningful looks across the conference table. Nancy was typing away on her laptop, probably adding this little confrontation to whatever file she was building on me. The trap was set, baited, and I had walked right into it with my eyes wide open. Here's the thing, though. I'd been expecting this moment for months. While they were busy building their case against me, I'd been building my own insurance policy. Remember those random HR check-ins Nancy had been scheduling? Turns out I wasn't the only one getting the special treatment. Over coffee and lunch breaks, I'd been talking to other senior engineers, guys like Pete Valdez, who'd been with the company for 13 years before getting restructured out last fall. Jim Parker, our former network architect, who'd been pushed into early retirement after questioning Tommy's decision to migrate our entire infrastructure to the cloud without a proper disaster recovery plan. The pattern was clear once you knew what to look for. Every engineer over 50 who'd pushed back against the modernization initiatives had found themselves on the wrong side of performance reviews. Every suggestion for caution, every question about cost-benefit analysis, every attempt to preserve institutional knowledge got labeled as resistance to change or failure to embrace innovation. I started keeping detailed notes of every interaction, every meeting, every casual hallway conversation where age came up. When Tommy made jokes about teaching old dogs new tricks during team stand-up. When Patricia mentioned needing digital natives for the mobile app project. When Nancy asked me during one of our check-ins how I felt about keeping up with younger colleagues. But my real ace in the hole came from an unexpected source. See, I'd been at Apex long enough to know where all the bodies were buried, metaphorically speaking. I knew which systems were held together with duct tape and prayer. I knew which innovative solutions from previous years had quietly been rolled back because they didn't actually work. And I knew that for all their talk about modernization, the company was completely dependent on legacy code that only a handful of us older engineers really understood. More importantly, I knew Rebecca Martinez in legal, who'd been with the company almost as long as I had. Rebecca and I had worked together on compliance reviews, data security audits, and patent applications. She knew the technical side better than most lawyers, and she'd seen firsthand how the company had changed over the years. 2 weeks ago, Rebecca pulled me aside after a particularly brutal architecture meeting where Tommy had essentially accused me of sabotaging progress. "Mike," she said quietly, "you need to be careful. They're building a case." "I know," I told her. "Question is, what kind of case am I building?" That's when Rebecca told me something interesting. As part of her legal duties, she'd been reviewing email retention policies and had noticed some concerning patterns in management communications. She couldn't share specifics, attorney-client privilege and all that, but she strongly suggested I might want to consult with an outside employment attorney. Just hypothetically, she said, if someone were to file an EEOC complaint alleging age discrimination, the discovery process might reveal some very interesting internal communications. I took her hint and called Sarah Torres. No relation to Rebecca, just a coincidence. Sarah's a former prosecutor who'd transitioned into employment law, specializing in workplace discrimination cases. She's not some white-shoe corporate lawyer, just a scrappy advocate who understands how big companies operate. Our first meeting was eye-opening. Sarah had handled dozens of age discrimination cases in Silicon Valley, and she knew the playbook these companies used word for word. They'll document every interaction, she explained. They'll create performance metrics that older employees can't possibly meet. They'll hire younger replacements before they fire you, then claim it's about skills and cultural fit, not age. What if I told you they've already started doing all of that? I asked. Sarah's eyes lit up. Then we need to start documenting everything from your side too. That's when I really started paying attention. Every email got saved. Every meeting got summarized. Every casual comment about age or experience got noted with date, time, and witnesses present. But the real smoking gun came last week during what would turn out to be my final team meeting. We were discussing the Q3 roadmap when Tommy brought up staffing changes. "We're going to need some fresh blood on the infrastructure team," he announced. "I'm thinking we bring in some recent graduates, people who understand modern development practices." "What about the institutional knowledge we'd lose?" asked Sarah Martinez, brave enough to speak up this time. "That's exactly the problem," Tommy replied. "We've got too much institutional knowledge. People get stuck in old ways of thinking, old ways of doing things. Sometimes you need to clear out the deadwood to make room for new growth." Deadwood. He actually said deadwood in a room full of engineers while looking directly at me. That night, I called Sarah Torres and told her it was time to get serious about this case. "Are you sure you want to go down this road?" she asked. "Employment litigation is expensive, time-consuming, and there's no guarantee we'll win." "Sarah," I said, "I've got 2.4 million reasons to be confident about this fight." That brings us back to yesterday's email and this morning's termination meeting. I walked into Patricia's corner office at 9 a.m. sharp, dressed in my best suit like I was going to a funeral. Which, in a way, I was. The funeral of my 15-year career at Apex. Patricia was there with Nancy from HR, and some guy in an expensive Italian suit I'd never seen before. The corporate execution squad, all assembled and ready for business. "Michael," Patricia began, her voice taking on that fake, sympathetic tone managers use when they're about to screw you over. "We need to discuss some concerns about your recent performance and attitude." I sat down and listened to the greatest hits from the corporate bullshit playlist. Difficulty adapting to new methodologies, resistance to collaborative problem solving, challenges integrating with evolving team dynamics, failure to embrace the company's innovative culture. It was almost impressive how they'd turned, I know what I'm talking about, and you don't, into performance deficiencies requiring immediate corrective action. The expensive suit introduced himself as Richard Blackstone from White & Case, brought in to make sure everything was documented properly and legally bulletproof. This wasn't just a firing, this was a corporate assassination with a paper trail. "We're prepared to offer you a generous severance package," Nancy said, sliding a folder across the mahogany table. 6 months' salary, continuation of health benefits, and positive references, all in exchange for signing a standard non-compete agreement and general release of claims. I flipped through the paperwork while they watched me like vultures waiting for roadkill to stop moving. The non-compete was brutal. 2 years, covering basically every tech company in Silicon Valley. The release was even worse, waiving my right to sue for anything that had happened during my entire employment. "This is quite comprehensive," I said, still reading. "You've really thought of everything." "We believe in being thorough," Blackstone replied, with the kind of shark smile you see in legal thrillers. "I'll need some time to review this with my attorney," I told them. Patricia's eyebrows shot up. She clearly hadn't expected me to have legal representation ready to go. "Of course, but we'll need an answer by close of business today. Your access has been suspended pending your decision." "Suspended?" I asked. I thought this was a discussion about performance improvement. "It's a precautionary measure," Nancy explained. "Standard protocol for transitioning responsibilities. They walked me out like I was some kind of security risk. 15 years of loyalty, of building their entire technical foundation, and they escorted me to the parking garage like a common criminal. The security guard, Tony, who I'd chatted with almost every morning for a decade, couldn't even look me in the eye. But here's what they didn't know. While they were executing their carefully planned corporate hit job, I'd been setting up my own surprise party. I called Sarah Torres from my car in the parking garage, engine running, watching Apex employees stream into the building for another day of innovation and collaboration. "It's done," I told her. "They just fired me. 6 months severance, 2-year non-compete, full release of claims." "How do you feel about their offer?" Sarah asked. "Like they just handed me the keys to their kingdom," I said. "When do we file?" "Give me 2 hours to prepare the paperwork. We're going to hit them with everything. EOC complaint, age discrimination, wrongful termination, and a few other surprises they won't see coming." While I waited for Sarah to work her magic, I drove over to my mom's assisted living facility in Palo Alto. She's 78 now, still sharp as a tack, but needs help with daily activities after her stroke 2 years ago. The monthly bill there could finance a small country, but seeing her face light up when I walk in makes every penny worth it. "Michael," she said when I found her in the activity room working on a crossword puzzle. "What are you doing here in the middle of the day? Don't you have computers to fix?" "Actually, Mom, I just got fired." She put down her pencil and looked at me with those penetrating eyes that used to see right through my teenage lies. "Good for you," she said. "It's about time you left that place." "What do you mean?" "Honey, you've been complaining about those people for 2 years. Every time you visit, it's Tommy this and Patricia that, and they don't understand how anything works. Life's too short to work for idiots. My mom, the management consultant, who knew? Besides," she continued, "didn't you tell me you had all that stock money sitting around? What are you worried about?" She was right, of course. The $7.2 million in my investment account meant I never had to work again if I didn't want to. But this wasn't about money anymore. This was about principle. At 2:30 p.m., while Patricia and her team were probably celebrating their clean execution over expensive sushi, Sarah Torres filed our response. Not just a rejection of their severance offer, but a formal complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission alleging systematic age discrimination. Sarah had been busy during those 2 hours. She'd interviewed Pete Valdez and Jim Parker, the other engineers who'd been pushed out. She'd documented the pattern of hiring younger replacements at lower salaries. She'd compiled statistics showing that 73% of employees terminated over the past 2 years had been over 45, while the company's hiring had skewed heavily toward recent graduates. But the real nuclear bomb was sitting in Sarah's briefcase, courtesy of a discovery request she'd filed as part of a previous case. Remember Rebecca Martinez mentioning interesting patterns in management communications? Turns out she'd been building her own file of concerning emails, not for any legal case, but just because she's a lawyer, and lawyers notice things like patterns of potentially discriminatory language. When Sarah explained that we might need internal communications for our case, Rebecca had a sudden attack of conscience about her duty to protect the company from legal liability. The best way to do that, she reasoned, was to make sure any problematic communications were properly reviewed by outside counsel. So she accidentally, on purpose, included a particularly damning email chain in a routine legal review that Sarah had requested for another client's case 6 months earlier. By the time anyone realized the mistake, the cat was already out of the bag and climbing all over the discovery process. The email chain was a thing of beauty. The subject line read HR Strategy, Senior Staff Optimization, and the participants were Patricia, Tommy, and Nancy, dating back 8 months. Patricia had written, "Tommy's assessment is correct. We need more agility in the engineering department. These older engineers are set in their ways and frankly expensive. Let's develop a transition plan to bring in younger talent at more competitive salary ranges." Nancy's response, agreed on the strategic direction. "I recommend we focus on collaboration and adaptability metrics rather than pure technical performance. Legal suggests building robust documentation around cultural fit and team integration issues." Tommy's contribution was the cherry on top. "Mike Patterson especially needs to go. Guy's a dinosaur who undermines my authority in every meeting. Plus his comp package is ridiculous for what he actually contributes. We could hire 3 junior engineers for what we're paying him. Age discrimination in writing, with a clear plan to manufacture pretextual reasons for termination, and explicit acknowledgement that salary cost was a motivating factor. It was like they'd written a how-to guide for violating federal employment law. When Sarah served this evidence along with our EEOC complaint, Apex's legal team must have needed immediate medical attention. Within 48 hours, Apex's entire legal strategy went from confident offense to desperate defense. Richard Blackstone, who'd been so smug during my termination meeting, was now calling Sarah Torres every few hours trying to arrange settlement talks. "They want to meet," Sarah told me over the phone. "Apparently there's been some miscommunication about your departure, and they'd like to clarify the situation before things get blown out of proportion." Miscommunication? I laughed. Is that what we're calling age discrimination now? The first settlement meeting was at White & Case's downtown office, all glass and marble and intimidation. They had 4 lawyers around the table, Blackstone plus 3 associates who looked like they'd graduated law school last week. Sarah and I sat across from them like David and Goliath. If David had 2.4 million shares of stock, and Goliath had just realized he'd stepped in quicksand. Patricia tried to play hardball initially. "This is all a misunderstanding," she insisted. "Michael's termination was purely performance-based. Those emails were taken out of context. We were discussing general workforce planning, not targeting any specific individual." Sarah smiled and opened her briefcase. "Would you like to see the statements from the 5 other employees over 45 who were terminated using identical language about collaboration issues and cultural fit? Or should we start with the statistical analysis showing your hiring patterns favor candidates under 30 by a factor of 4 to 1? Blackstone looked like he'd swallowed a live fish. "Perhaps we should discuss resolution options." Here's where it got interesting. They offered me full reinstatement with back pay, a promotion to principal engineer with a $40,000 salary bump, and a formal apology from the company. They'd also implement mandatory anti-discrimination training and establish an independent review process for all future terminations of employees over 45. It was everything I should have wanted: vindication, promotion, protection for other older workers, the complete corporate surrender. "I appreciate the offer," I told them, "but I'm not interested in coming back. You could have heard a pin drop in that conference room." Patricia looked genuinely confused. "Why wouldn't you want your job back?" "Because," I said, "I don't want to work for people who tried to destroy my career based on my age. Call me old-fashioned." Sarah had prepared for this response. We negotiated a different kind of settlement, Apex would pay me $850,000 in damages, plus all legal fees. They'd provide a glowing reference letter acknowledging my contributions to the company's success. Most importantly, they had to send a company-wide memo explaining that my departure was voluntary and that age discrimination would not be tolerated going forward. The individual consequences were particularly satisfying. Patricia had to complete 40 hours of sensitivity training and submit to quarterly performance reviews by the board of directors. Tommy was transferred to strategic initiatives, corporate speak for a dead-end role where he could play with PowerPoint all day without hurting actual operations. Nancy was demoted to HR specialist and put on a 6-month performance improvement plan. But here's the beautiful part. I still owned every single one of my 20 and 400,000 shares. At yesterday's closing price of $3.18, that portfolio was worth $7,632,000. Add the settlement money, and we're talking about enough wealth to fund a very comfortable retirement. The best revenge? I used some of that money to start Patterson Systems Consulting. Turns out there's a huge market for helping companies maintain their legacy infrastructure while avoiding the pitfalls of unnecessary modernization. My first client was Dataflow Solutions, Apex's biggest competitor, who was thrilled to hire someone with intimate knowledge of their rival's technical architecture and operational weaknesses. Within 6 months, I'd landed contracts with 4 other companies in the industry. Word gets around fast in Silicon Valley when you can help organizations avoid multi-million-dollar mistakes in the name of innovation. Emma finished her medical residency last month and landed a position at UCSF's cardiology department. Her student loans are paid off thanks to the settlement money. Jake graduated from Stanford with a computer science degree and 0 debt. He's working for a startup now, building something actually innovative instead of just slapping buzzwords on existing solutions. Mom's assisted living is paid through 2030, with enough left over for the occasional family vacation. Last month, we took a cruise to Alaska, something I'd been promising to do for years but never had the time or financial security to arrange. The funniest part? Patricia sent me a LinkedIn connection request 3 weeks ago. I haven't decided whether to accept it yet, but I'm leaning toward yes. After all, I want a front row seat when Apex's legacy systems start failing and they realize they fired the only person who really understood how to maintain them. That conversation happened sooner than I expected. Last Tuesday, their authentication system went down for 6 hours during peak trading time. Cost them an estimated $2.3 million in lost revenue and customer compensation. The outage was caused by a memory leak in a module I'd written warnings about for 3 years. Warnings that Tommy had dismissed as fear-mongering from someone resistant to change. They called me that evening. Not Patricia or Tommy, but Rebecca Martinez from legal, asking if I'd consider coming in as an emergency consultant to fix the problem. My consulting rate is $500 per hour, I told her. Minimum 40-hour engagement, payable in advance. That's substantial, Rebecca said. Rebecca, you guys just lost $2.3 million because you fired the person who could have prevented this outage. My rate's looking pretty reasonable right now. They paid it. All $20,000 wired to my business account before I even walked in the building. It took me 6 hours to fix what would have taken their current team 6 weeks to figure out, assuming they could figure it out at all. Tommy was there during the repair, watching me work on code he'd spent 2 years trying to replace. He didn't say much, just stood there, looking like someone who'd finally realized he was in way over his head. You know, I told him while running the final tests, if you'd spent half as much time learning these systems as you did trying to replace them, you could have been a pretty good engineer. He nodded quietly. Maybe he was finally learning something. As I walked out of Apex that day, for what I assumed would be the last time, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Not anger, not vindication, just simple satisfaction. They'd tried to throw me away like an old computer that couldn't run the latest software. Instead, they'd discovered that sometimes the old hardware is the only thing that actually works. My phone's been ringing nonstop since word got out about the Apex consultation. Apparently, there are a lot of companies out there who've realized that firing experienced engineers in favor of fresh perspectives might not be the smartest long-term strategy. At 52, I'm busier than I've ever been, making more money than I ever imagined, and working with people who actually value experience over PowerPoint presentations. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's building something better while watching your old company realize what they gave up. I think I will accept that LinkedIn connection from Patricia after all. I want to make sure I don't miss it when they inevitably need my help again. That's going to be another fun conversation.